So Iran had this strategy, forward defense strategy of recruiting militias, working with Assad in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this has been undone by Israel. The question I have is that strategy judged to have been a failure inside Iran? It looks a failure to me from outside, but I have seen reports that inside Iran it's thought that it slowed down the moment at which Israel attacked. And if it wasn't seen as a failure, or indeed if it's still seen as worth doing, can Iran resurrect this strategy, especially now that Syria is, Iran has no presence in Syria really. It's much more dominated by Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So is this forward defense strategy that was so disruptive for the region actually kind of permanently finished?
In fact, with other conversations that we had, the focus wasn't on trying to stand up some form of nuclear weaponization or on proxies. It was on missiles. They were putting almost all their eggs in that basket.
Well, look, I hope you're right. I mean, this is now sounding somewhat optimistic, right? A regime that thinks its past approach wasn't working, a regime that is serious about wanting to have negotiations. Hanging over this, at least for me, and this gets us to perhaps the third big question, is the regime itself. I mean, you've intimated that you're never quite sure where the real source of power is or what is indeed going on. But what is your sense? You were there for the first time, but did you see very much evidence of the sort of overhanging clout of the supreme leader? Was he visible? He's 86 and frail.
Yeah, I think because I was a naive, first-timer in Iran, it was easier for me to go to people and say, look, I don't know anything about this country.
Naive.
But your supreme leader, he's pretty old, isn't he? He's going to die soon. What happens next?
Is that what you said?
Yes. And I was interested to see, first of all, how they'd react to the question, but then what they'd actually say. People were very shy of speculating on who the next leader could be or giving us any particular names. But it's clearly the game that is played in the parlours, in the cafes, where people can speak frankly, in Iran. So I think that is a huge question that's looming and hanging over Iran now.
I find people more open this time to talk about names, but also to say that whoever's a stalking horse now would probably not be the name that emerges, that until nobody knew who Raisi was, the previous president, or Pezeshkian, or until these names are sort of somehow dangled in front of their public.
But there were reports, Nick, that when Khamenei retreated into his bunker during the 12-day war and clearly actually was sort of marginalized a bit. But he felt he was a target, and he drew up a list of successors which didn't include the favorite, his son Mojtaba, but did include 3 other names, and we don't know who they are.
The way in which we've traditionally tried to understand Iran is reformists and hardliners. Some call them principalists. The reformists were their former president Rouhani is somebody who is a cleric and is still very much a name that is being touted as kind of somebody who could step into the role of supreme leader. The hardliners have the backing of the Revolutionary Guard, or in our traditional way that we understand Iran, have their backing. The problem with all of this is that everything has become much more muddled, that what may be driving many decisions is not ideology, it's money, it's interests, it's turf. And I think that has led to a massive blurring of who controls what, of different alliances which straddle the lines of reformist and hardliner. So you're actually ending up with a much more kind of complex picture, and it may actually take time. There may not be a single name that emerges immediately. It may take time for a new leader, if there is going to be one, to establish themselves.
Did you get the sense there that this was a regime that would be around in 5 years' time?
The absolute misery of a lot of Iranians suggests to me that they're going to struggle and they're going to get more and more angry. So I'm going to have a guess that they're going to fall within 5 years.
They're going to fall. What about you, Ed?
I think they'll still be around because we've predicted it so many times. The big question for me is a change of leader, a change of regime, and that's the most dangerous moment since Khamenei took power.
Nick?
I'm going to hedge and say that I think the regime will try to reinvent itself, just as it's accepted that the veil, which was a sort of a symbol of the regime, can go, just as it's reaching out to America and the Great Satan can go, just as we're now seeing in the main square in Tehran, which is Islamic Revolution Square. They've erected a huge statue to a past hero predating the age of Islam. They're resurrecting national symbols, they're resurrecting ancient Persian symbols. This is a regime which I think understands that its old narrative is not working and is going to try and adapt and establish a new narrative, but keep the placeholders there.
That's really interesting. So the regime stays in power by reinventing itself as a nationalist regime. Talk us through a little bit more what those signs were and where you think that goes.
I mean, on the streets, it's really hard to see signs of theocracy. You see them in the billboards, but I think in the whole time we were there, we may have seen, one cleric walking on the street? One cleric. You don't see the presence of religion in society. This is, secular. People we met described Iran as the most secular society in the Middle East. Some said in the world.
People you met described Iran as the most secular society in the world?
I certainly heard that when we were chatting to people. There's an idea from the outside, I certainly had it, that Iran, it's a place of mad mullahs and nuclear bombs and that's it. And you get there and ordinary people are living pretty ordinary lives. They're riding on a metro, they're sitting in cafes, they're very nice coffee shops. These people are not all going to pray 3 times a day. They're living a pretty ordinary life.
It's a country that wants to be connected to the rest of the world, that feels itself, wants to have its natural place in the international order. And, the ideology of the regime, of the revolution, doesn't fit that. And so the revolution, the leadership, if it's going to survive, is going to have to adjust to its own population. And in many ways already has taken major strides towards that.
I think that's potentially an enormous source of tension, because the IRGC, the guards, which are heavily involved in the economy, make enormous amounts of money out of sanctions. That's what allows them to control the economy. Yeah. An open economy is a big threat to them. So you have a move to nationalism, which gives power to the guards, but the guards want distance between Iran and the rest of the world. That's the source of revenue.
So you think that because of the benefits that the guards get from the existing regime, they will be resistant to any kind of reform that leads to an opening?
And integration, yeah. And the last point I'd make is, don't forget that the Iranian nuclear program began under the Shah. This is in spite of what Benjamin Netanyahu says, this is not an Islamic bomb. It's an Iranian bomb. It's a national bomb. And therefore, I think a movement away from a theocracy, if that's what happens, doesn't mean that the nuclear program goes away. That's not its inspiration.
Do you agree with that, Nick?
I very much agree with Ed's point about this tension between, does Iran live in splendid isolation? You're talking about an economy which is a country which is 90 million strong, which has a strong internal economy, which in itself can, has oil, has fuel, has many ways of sustaining itself, can continue to get by. Do the guards, do the people at the helm continue to monopolize that? In which case sanctions is serving them. We met one industrialist who insisted that productivity was increasing because others weren't coming in. And indeed, in places where there might be competition, like China, Iran is putting in sanctions of its own, if you like, protection to stop that competition. There is this huge tension between, does Iran remain this closed society in the grip of the guards, or does it do what its people want to do and reach out to the rest of the world?